The idea of the free market is the biggest lie of capitalism. Today I want to talk about how the free market and neoliberalism as an ideology basically has very little to do with capitalism as a real economic and political system. So basically the idea behind neoliberalism is that you have an economy where you have a multitude of producers in competition with one another, and you have a multitude of consumers also in competition with one another, and they come together in a market where competition from one side and the other will produce an equilibrium in the middle through the market where prices will be set, where quantities of goods and services will be set, and all that happens by an invisible hand, and that the result of this market is just the result of freedom, the freedom of producers and the freedom of consumers. That's the theory. It's mostly bullshit. When we look at real capitalism today, when we look at the biggest, most powerful corporations, these most of the time are not corporations that act in the context of a free market. Quite the opposite. The way that they make their money, the way that they have become so rich and so big, is because they exercise a position of monopoly or quasi-monopoly. I'm thinking of those in big oil, big pharma, telecommunication, the big banks, insurance, and others like them. These are not companies that operate within a really free market. Quite the opposite. Often they are in a situation that we call oligopolies, meaning a very, very small number of corporations that basically control the market. It has nothing to do with a free market. It's quite the opposite. It goes back to what I've said before. Capitalism is not just a means of producing things. It's also a power structure. It is a way of allocating power within a society. When we look at all the indicators, we see a tremendous, tremendous concentration of economic power in the hands of a few. Because in theory, capitalism is based on freedom. But real capitalism is quite the opposite. It's a system of domination of a very few powerful people and corporations over the entire planet. This is the crucial point to understand. Capitalism is really about corporate control, much more than it has anything to do with market freedoms. Now, of course, some companies, some corporations act through the market, and there is some competition. There's no doubt about that. But let's be clear. Capitalism is about the private ownership of the means of production and investment and the private appropriation of profit. Whether that's done through the market, a competitive market, or whether that's done through a monopoly, or whether that's done by another mean, has little importance to capitalists as long as they make money. In the last 40 years, we've seen through just waves of mergers and acquisitions and sometimes bankruptcies, the number of corporations acting within a certain sector go down and down and down and down, where maybe 40 years ago you did have maybe 20 or 30 corporations within a sector. Today you're down to 3 or 4. So basically the market is less and less competitive. Real capitalism is much closer to the idea of a cartel than it is of just a sum of individual decisions. There's also a lot of corporations that make a lot of money, and they're not acting within a competitive market. Think, for instance, of the military-industrial complex. Well, their client is the state, and they have no problem making money, even if it's not within a competitive market with a multitude of producers and a multitude of consumers. Even if there's just one consumer, government, if they can make money off government, they're very happy. So even though the market and capitalism sometimes go together, that's not necessarily the case. So there's a school of thought out there called market socialism that basically says we can have an economy that has a lot of the elements of the market, but we can still transition from being, for instance, our businesses and our industries could become worker-owned industries. And most of the investments, instead of being through private investment, could be done through a form of collective or democratic investment. So in that situation, you would no longer be in a capitalist economy, but you would not have done away with the market entirely. The market would still exist, and yet you would still be in a more of a socialist type of society. So that's just another example to show that the idea of market and capitalism are different. So I'm not saying I completely agree with market socialists, because I always believe that there's an extremely important part for public services and even public-owned enterprise, and that must also be part of the mix. That being said, market socialists do insist that you can have a socialist society without completely doing away with the market, and that's an important lesson. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that I'm always for the market and or that the market is never a problem. Sometimes it is a problem, and we must move away from the market. Let us be clear that the adversary of the economic left is not first and foremost the market. It is capitalism, and that markets and capitalism are two distinct things. So in order for us to build a winning left, we need to understand what capitalism is, what it isn't, and also what is the role that markets can and cannot play. So please like and share these videos on social media. Please hit the subscribe button on my YouTube channel. These videos can obviously be seen as standalones, but you'll probably get more out of them if you see them within the entire series, Building a Winning Left. So with that, I wish you a good day. See you soon.